Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It's the day after the night before Baldy. Ashes mania continues. End of the second test at the home of cricket, Lords. We've got plenty to talk about. So much to talk about, in fact, that we've ditched Raj and Lippy off the pod.
Yep.
And it is a uniquely Australian and English lineup tonight.
One-on-one.
One-on-one. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. We're going to talk performances from both sides, a look forward to Headingley, and of course some of the incidents from this game at Lords.
Plenty to talk about.
Mate, so it's... Yeah,
I feel drained. Honestly, this last 24 hours has drained me. I feel absolutely emotionally drained after this whole conclusion to the second test at Lords, really, honestly.
Look, it's difficult to know really where to start, but I think we're going to probably come on to a number of things. So we're clearly going to talk the Australian performance, the cricket. I think we'll talk a little bit about England's performance throughout the course of the test match. We've got to wrap up probably three key incidents as well. Nathan Lyon potentially out of the series, or not potentially.
He is out of the series now.
Officially ruled out.
Yes, he has been.
The Starc situation, drop or catch, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And then the Carey Bairstow stumping as well. And we'll also have a look forward to Headingley as well. But look, I think in the vein that we've gone with a lot of these podcasts is to really talk about sports to the victors. And Australia, look, from my perspective, played another really, really good game of Test cricket. Certainly in terms of that batting performance, I would say, without being super one-eyed on this, you guys had probably the worst of the batting conditions throughout the course of the Test match. Certainly that first day, you rode a little bit of luck going through the first hour or so. The ball, beat the bat, but you'll have days like that, and you probably earn that right to then bat when it does get a little bit flatter. And then again, you were batting under lights again in that second innings as well. A bit, the overheads were probably worse for Australia. But what do you want to talk about in terms of the Aussie performances through the course of the Test match?
Well, I think you touched on a really important point there, and it wasn't necessarily the difference in this Test match, but it's certainly the difference between the 2023 series and the 2019 series in that Australia were able to get through the new ball. So it might not show on the scorecard, 66 and 17 in the first innings for Warner and Khawaja, and then I think it's sort of, 70 and 25 in the second innings. So handy contributions at the top of the order from the Australians, but they made partnerships in that in both innings, 70 and 60, which they weren't able to do anywhere near close to that in 2019. So that was able to set the tone for Australia, and Australia were able to play some front foot cricket, having been sent in at Lords on, I think, a day that England would have favoured themselves to bowl Australia out on day one if things had have gone their way. So, for Australia to make 416 at 4 and over, having been sent in, really was able to set them up to play some positive cricket throughout the Test match. And there were some fantastic performances in that first innings. I mean, you have a look, Warner making 66, Khawaja makes his 32nd Test 100, makes 110, and now equals Steve Waugh on that list of century makers for Australia. And obviously, Travis Head comes in and does Travis Head things and makes 77. So there's lots to like about that Australian innings, but it was all set up by that opening partnership and to be able to get through that difficult first hour.
Yeah, and look, I think I just kind of noted down as you went through some of that, the difference for me in terms of that top order performance was, and look, we'll come on to talk about it, I think in England's first go at batting, we were 188 for one, or 1 for 188 for our Australian viewers and listeners, all out 323, whereas, you were 3 for 198, and then put on, a really, really telling partnership to get to 4 for 316, and then added another 100 runs for, the 6 wickets that you lost relatively quickly.
Yes.
But I think we'll come on to it. But that's the difference in the Test match, really, is your ability to add, a couple of 100 runs from that position versus England only adding 130 odd from being in a really, really strong position. How much of that was that down to the Australian bowling though? Mitchell Starc 3 fers in both innings, and then all the seamers really showed up in terms of the wickets column in the second innings, other than Cameron Green.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get on to Cameron Green because he's been a bit of a fly in the ointment for this Test match for me as far as on-field performance is concerned. His dismissal in the first innings was really poor. I think if you showed that dismissal at a video review at an A-grade club game and the situation that the players were in, I think that player would be in for a bit of a chewing out from his captain and his coach, because at that point Australia were right on top and there was no reason to play that shot. It just let England back in the match a little bit and gave England a sniff at 300 for...
316 for 5.
For 5 at that point, right? Where there was no need. Australia were right on top at 300 for 3. Travis Head got out, walked past one to Joe Root, who I thought has been performing really, really well in this Test match as a bowler.
Yeah.
I honestly, he is better than a part-timer for England. I don't think they've missed him, so we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But yes, I think Australia, Mitchell Starc, maybe even before the second innings, probably would have come in for some criticism for the way he not leaked runs, but England were able to get after him. But he produced some absolute jaffers that just showed his value. And he, like you said, he got 3 wickets in both innings. He was not the difference between the two teams, but he certainly was able to provide the Australians with something different. And that ball that got Pope in the second innings, was it Pope that was dismissed? That's unplayable. Like that, he's able to produce deliveries like that.
That's getting. I mean, you can probably have a little bit of a crack at Pope's technique there. He's trying to hit the ball probably a touch squarer than
that's probably fair.
Than you would want to. But I think that gets a lot of top order players out at that speed, and particularly given the fact that really the pitch was from a full pitch perspective. I think Jimmy Anderson said, part of the reason that even he subscribed and had to get into the bumper theory was he just said, I'm not going to get anyone out pitching the ball up. But I think probably with the exception of Mitchell Starc, that was the same for all of the seamers. That pitched up, typical Test match line and length on fourth stump, just hitting a hard length, offered almost nothing to the seamers throughout the course.
Very, very little. I mean, Starc got that one to bowl Pope. I think, was it Cummins got Joe Root out with a ball that sort of just straightened a little bit. But other than that, really not a lot in it for the
guys hitting a hard length.
Yeah, exactly. And both teams had to resort to a different tactic to be successful.
Yeah. In terms of, look, I guess the seam attack and the makeup, you mentioned Cameron Green. What are your concerns around his performance in this game? Is it bat and ball?
Oh, bat and ball, absolutely. He hasn't been effective in this Lord's Test match with either bat or ball. We'll get on to the Stokes innings, but he was ineffective bowling to Ben Stokes. He dropped a very, very difficult chance in the gully, but otherwise, his hands have been fantastic. That was a very, very tough chance. He might think like he could have caught it, but most wouldn't. But it's just his ineffectiveness with the bat and the ball that was a little bit disappointing in an otherwise pretty all-round solid Australian performance. It's hard to look down that scorecard and look at players who didn't contribute in some way towards that Australian victory.
We'll come on to England in a sec. I'm sure, we'd like to get your spin on the questions you want to ask about that England performance. But before we do, got to talk probably about Nathan Lyon. So limped out of the attack in the first innings and looked unlikely that he was going to play any further part in the game until he hobbled out to bat. I guess, A, in terms of the incident in the context of this game, but B, in the context of the series, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it was an interesting one because England were not cruising, but England were starting to get on top a little bit when Nathan Lyon got injured. And weirdly enough, it was a catalyst for Australia to take sort of 3 wickets in quick succession. It's a devastating injury for Nathan Lyon. I mean, he was feted in the media and in a lot of circles in the lead up to the match playing his 100th consecutive test, and only 6 players in the history of the game have ever gone to do that. I don't think any of them were bowlers necessarily, or spin bowlers. I might be wrong on that. But, he has played every test, I think, since 2013. And now in his 100th consecutive test gets injured. He'll be out for the rest of the series and will be a big set of shoes to fill from Australia from a spin bowling contingent, because we do rely heavily on having a spin bowler in the team and one that can keep England under control. I think the implications for the rest of the series are that England are now going to be able to target whoever Australia replace him with. I imagine it's going to be Todd Murphy, who's in the squad, who looks, from his experience in India, ready to replace Nathan Lyon from a skill perspective. But Ashes cricket is, as we know, very, very different to any other series, particularly the mental challenges that he'll be faced with, particularly, again, raise the bar with how England are playing the series and how this series has, over the last 48 hours, just exploded into just another different beast altogether. So these are all hills that Todd Murphy's going to have to climb for the first time if he's the one that replaces Nathan Lyon. But you have a look at England in this Test match. I don't think they missed a spinner, to be fair, in terms of what they got out of Joe Root in particular. Australia had some success, I think, with Travis Head. He's probably slightly better than a part-timer. I saw him compared in one set of commentary to Joe Root in terms of his effectiveness. I don't think he's anywhere near that. I think Joe Root is a much better bowler than Travis Head at this point. But it'll be interesting to see where Australia go from a selection point of view, whether or not they do include Todd Murphy for Headingley. And I think conditions both overhead and at the ground will largely dictate where we go from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess a word on Lyon going out to bat. Your thoughts on whether or not that was the right thing to do?
Yeah, it's
the Australian thing to do.
Well, I would agree with you. I mean, I think, I don't know Nathan Lyon personally, but I think that he will have listened to medical advice and he would have potentially been given advice as to whether or not going out to bat could have caused further damage to his calf injury. And I would have to assume that he wouldn't have been given advice that says you're going to do yourself a real mischief here if you go out and bat and you could really hurt yourself. So if he wasn't going to do himself any more mischief, he doesn't play a lot of white ball cricket. So after this, he's probably got a reasonably big break coming up anyway. And if it was going to be his last Ashes test match potentially, why wouldn't you go out to bat? Why wouldn't you try and get an extra 10 or 15 runs that could have made the difference at the end of the day? I mean, the margin was 40. If the margin was 15, you know, there would have been some squeaky bums in that Australian fielding unit and probably in the dressing room as well if Australia hadn't have got those extra 15 runs at the end of the innings. So, look, I certainly won't question Nathan Lyon's commitment to the team or his decision-making to go out to bat in that circumstance. I would have done the same thing, and I think a lot of Australians would have done the same thing. I don't think if he had had a head injury, I mean, he wouldn't have been allowed to, but if it was something like that could have posed a significant health risk, I think he probably wouldn't have gone out to bat. But if he hadn't done any more damage to his calf muscle, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? I do. I want to ask you about your thoughts on the England performance because there's a lot to unpack here, positive and negative from the England performance. Let's start with the opening bats for England. Let's start with Crawley and Duckett because a lot was said about them in the lead up to the match. A lot's been said about the opening partnerships sort of in general. How did you see, you know, the first innings for England's Crawley and Duckett and then the second innings as they started to put together, you know, a big mountain to climb?
Yeah, look, I've kind of written on my run notes. I think that the Crawley situation's almost sort of gone away. That, you know, he's gone out. He's almost in a way, using the word standard bearer is probably the wrong language, but he's certainly the guy that they've wanted to set the tone. He's set the tone, I think, in a relatively positive way throughout the course of the series. You know, should go back to that first test match. He hits the first ball for 4 through the covers. Now, look, it was asking to be hit. It was in the right area. Yep. But then, you know, in this game, again, he's come out really, really positively, got to 48, and then, you know, really, really good piece of wicket keeping actually to get him stumped down the leg side by Alex Carey. It took a little bit of pad. It was, you know, a really, really good take. You know, but at that point, I think he had the license to do what he was doing, and I think that's a big part of this England batting partnership at the top of the order as well. They're given license to go out, and you know, some days they are going to nick off early doors. Other days they are going to put a team like they did in this game under, you know, immense pressure. You know, 100 for one or 90 odd for one when Crawley was out. Duckett, again, like the stats just keep continuing. He's got, I think now 1,000 test runs or thereabouts, at an average somewhere in the region, or a strike rate, I should say, somewhere above 85.
Look at that test average so far.
And yeah, look, considering that he came into the side in Bangladesh, I think, and struggled then a little bit with a baptism against spin in Bangladesh and India, to get to the point now where he's averaging 48. You know, he hasn't left a ball since, you know, Christmas 1933 or something like that, and a strike rate, particularly in this Ashes series so far, approaching 100. You know, he had a really, really good test match with that 98. And then again, you'd say, I have to say, and we'll come on to it, I'm sure, with your next question, or certainly one of your next questions around the England batting collapse. I think he's probably one of the only guys in that you can absolve, not of any responsibility, but he was trying to hit the ball down and it did bounce a little bit more and he did get a little bit of a top edge. It wasn't like he was trying to do something that he hadn't been doing. Relatively successful up until then. And then when we kind of fast forward, very successfully, the way that he played the short ball, I thought, in the second innings. Yep. And I think if you say, well, he's got out twice to the short ball, yeah, but he's scored nearly 200 runs. So if he's averaging out to the short ball is 70 odd, you'd take that going into pretty much any test match, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ben Duckett, overachieving sounds harsh when I say it, but he has overachieved for England since coming into the side, I think. I don't think that when he was drafted into that England team, they expected him to put up the kinds of performances that he has for England at the top of the order. And I've got to be honest, at the start of the series, I thought Australia would target Ben Duckett to try and nick him off early because, as you say, he plays everything. Yeah. He plays everything at the top of the order. And if you've got guys like Hazelwood, Cummins, Starc, they'd be backing themselves to nick him off early doors. But he's been fantastic for England in these first 2 test matches. I've been really, really impressed. Let's get on to the bouncer stuff because England were going well. 188 for 1 after 38 overs. We're looking in real control, absolute control. Australia changed their tactic. They went short to England. They were very deliberate about their field placings. They were deliberate about where they bowled the ball. They mixed it up a little bit, but predominantly it was short pitch bowling, somewhere between the badge on the chest and the badge on the helmet. Yeah, it was really accurate stuff. England succumbed to that. I would agree with you that Ben Duckett is, to a certain extent, not culpable for his dismissal. How did you see the rest of it?
Well, if he wasn't culpable, the other guys certainly were culpable. And look, I think we'll come on to it in terms of whether this was an entertaining tactic to watch throughout the course of the test match for fans on both sides of the Pacific Ocean and other oceans in between as well if you're in England. But look, I think we look at Ollie Pope was the first one out in that sort of bouncer barrage, hold out. To look, a ball that he just really shouldn't have been trying to hit in that area in that fashion. Then Joe Root, again, swatted away, flapped away, whatever adjective you want to use. It was abjectly poor from England's best batter over the course of the last 10 years. And then, we come back the following day and Harry Brook. What on earth he was trying to do, I really don't know. Someone said, and I noticed this from a lot of my YouTube viewing, he's been partnered with MLB Baseball this year. He's I think ambassador for MLB.
Yes.
And it looked like he was playing for the St. Louis Cardinals, to be perfectly honest. And I think that those guys have got to go and have a really, really hard look at themselves. And look, we'll come on to, I think, a change in England's rhetoric after this test match as we look to preview Headingley. But the thing for me here is that we've talked a lot about it. I've said it privately. I've said it on air last week. There's a difference between reckless and positive, and there's a difference between grinding a side down and being absolutely ruthless. And England have missed that trick. They have missed an opportunity here to create the positivity that they want to create, which they had at 1 for 188, and then actually just go, do you know what? We can just take a little bit off this in this session. Let's see if these guys are going to bowl this theory to us for 10 overs, 20 overs, 30 overs, because by being positive and getting to 1 for 188, we've given ourselves the opportunity. We've put the time into the game, which they keep talking about. They've done that. I think they could have just sat in a little bit and perhaps tired those bowlers out, get them coming back and trying to do the same thing again for a second spell that, the next day. And then when the time is right and Australia's plan inevitably has to change again, then you go and create the chaos you've created in the first 20 overs again and literally go, storm, calm, storm, rather than just trying to go storm all the way through the innings.
It's going to disappoint listeners and viewers of this podcast greatly, but I completely agree with you in that respect. Both sides tried that tactic and it was not allowed to succeed, but it succeeded because the batters fell for the trap. Eventually, Khawaja fell for the trap in the second innings. A couple of the Australians fell for the trap. Cameron Green fell for the trap in the second innings really badly. 18 off 70 or whatever it was. Worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And just when you thought he'd done enough work, he undid it all by trying to hit the ball for 6. And I think that was the real disappointment with the Pope dismissal, is that he knew where the fielders were and he tried to take them on and hit the ball for 6, knowing that they were out there. I'm not sure about the Root one, but it felt like he didn't need to play that shot at that point. And I wonder if England have learned the lesson from this test match in that if they just respect, and I don't mean that word disparagingly, but if they just respect Australia's bowling just a tiny little bit more, that they might earn the right to be in that position, that they make Australia work that little bit harder and they make Australia bowl 10 or 12 short pitch bowling overs at them instead of 6 before they get the breakthrough. And that may make a difference. Australia starts flagging and then England go, aha, now we can score at 8 or 9 and over again. And that's where they're at their most dangerous. And that's the concern, I think, when we get to the Headingley prep. If that's the lesson that England learned from this test match, Australia's in a bit of trouble because that's the lesson they need to learn, I think.
Look, I agree with you. I know Stu asked us not to agree too much on this podcast.
We'll get there.
I'm sure we will. We've got three pretty spicy incidents to talk about. But yeah, look, for me, I don't think they would have learned their lesson if it wasn't for what's happened later in the game. I agree with you. I think the lesson's going to come from somewhere else.
Yep.
And I think as a byproduct of that, they'll learn the lesson from the way that they've batted. I do want to just ask you a question about England. And look, feel free to throw back for me, but I'm really trying to reconcile this and I can't quite reconcile it. A lot of chat going on a couple of my WhatsApp groups with some mates back home around Jimmy Anderson. Mm-hmm. So I think if we look at, some of the stats that, you've typically pointed to with Jimmy Anderson in the past, the ability to bowl dry, he bowled 20 overs in the first innings, went for about 2.5, only picked up, one wicket. And then through the course of the Australian second innings, a little bit more expensive. And again, only picked up the 1 wicket. And, the point I made earlier on said, he felt almost toothless on this wicket. And I think the wicket and the cricket ball, these Dukes balls seem to be going really soft, really quickly. I don't think it's going to have helped. We've already seen a casualty in Scott Boland. He got kited all over the place in that first Test match. Would you, if you were an Englishman, have any worry about Jimmy Anderson's ability, or is this a case of don't write a great one off too quickly?
Yeah, I don't think you can write a great player like Jimmy Anderson off. It wasn't, unfortunately for him, it wasn't a surface that is conducive to his style of bowling. And unfortunately, it just so transpired that he was the most ineffective of the bowlers, because when you're 40 years old and you're bowling, I don't know how fast he bowls now, I'd say it's probably 130-ish, maybe a little bit more than that, 132 maybe, whatever it is. He's not going to be as quick as a Josh Tongue, for instance, or even a Stuart Broad or a Starc or whoever. So if he's asked to do that job, that's kind of not his job. His job is to pitch the ball up, swing it, and use the top 2 inches of his brain to winkle a guy out at the other end. And if all you've got in your repertoire is the Neil Wagner fallback, it's very difficult for a guy like Jimmy Anderson to be able to do that at any stage of his career if he's not constructed in his game to do that. So I just don't think it is his surface. And if he gets surfaces that are more conducive to the way he bowls, he's still going to be effective. We know he's still going to be effective. I wouldn't be concerned if I was England. I'd be just asking, can we set him up for better success in the way we set up our cricket wickets, we set up the way that we play?
Yeah, and look, I think it's going to be interesting. Of all the seamers, he bowled take Ben Stokes out of the equation, who didn't really come on to bowl until he had to in that second innings. Anderson bowled the least of any of the other seamers in that Australian second dig. So I personally am hoping that's indicative of the fact that they are, looking at his workload, and Headingley typically is a ground where the overheads, if they're on, are going to suit him down to the ground. I don't want to write him off, but there's certainly a couple of my mates back home who have called for his retirement, even if it's just in our private WhatsApp group.
Again, if you're thinking about it from an Australian point of view, and they've got the wall plan on the hotel conference room wall, and they're looking at, okay, we're planning for the rest of the series. Are they asking, would they prefer to be facing Jimmy Anderson or whoever comes in to replace Jimmy Anderson? And almost certainly it will be, we'd rather face the other guy. You know what I mean? So I think it would be doing him a disservice to be ruling him out at this point. Right.
We've been quite cordial up until this point. I think it's time to get into two big talking points from the game. Let's go in chronological order and talk about Mitchell Starc. So I've written it down as a drop. I'm sure you'll write it down as a catch. But yeah, what are our thoughts on the way that incident has taken place over, what was it, the third evening of the game, I think?
Yeah, gosh, so much has happened. We have to go right back to the third day, and it feels like a series ago that happened. Australia had really no right to be upset at that being called not out. because the law of cricket says the player must maintain control over the ball and the body, and Mitchell Starc clearly did not have control over his body, and the ball was placed on the ground as he slid along. That is not out. And Australia can be upset, annoyed at the decision if they like, but it's not out. It's always been not out. This is not a rule change. This is nothing controversial. It's just flat out not out. And I'm sorry. That's
Baldy, stop doing that with you, whatever you're doing.
Sorry, I'm getting nervous, Binksy, and I started playing with something to relieve the tension. But it's not out. It's just not out. I'm sorry. You can't be too upset with that decision.
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised that you've not sort of brought up, I guess, the fact that across every single game we'd have played in this summer, if that had ever happened, would you have thought there was any conjecture around that in a game of club cricket?
No, not at all. And this is the thing. Like
that's out 999 times in first class cricket, in club cricket. You're not looking at it that closely, forensically.
Yes,
and there's an example of that. I think Carl Jameson took a caught and bowled where, again, he put his hand out forwards with the ball on the floor. That was ruled to be not out. I guess I'm just surprised the third umpires even looked at this in a great deal of detail.
I mean, you're absolutely right. The challenge is that this series has got so much scrutiny on it, and we've had catches that, low catches that have been claimed that have had to undergo scrutiny already in the series. So the precedent has been set that every time the ball is close to the ground, it's going to get that really, really forensic view. I think we've been fortunate so far that we've been able to see with a reasonable degree of certainty the ones that are out have been out, and the ones that are not out have been clearly, ball on ground. Where it's going to be really controversial is if we get one of those ones where the ball hits the bottom of the fingers and then bounces up into the hand. We get one of those, and, diplomatic relations between, Parliament House in Canberra and Buckingham Palace could be really, really strained. Yeah. If they're not already.
Yeah, and look, for the record, I think that the right decision was reached based on the laws of the game. I think if I just reflect on a number of similar type scenarios, it's quite often you will see someone catch the ball in the slips or in the gully. They are rolling, they are diving, and in the middle of that act, they will throw the ball up in the air in celebration. So I think if Starc had caught that ball and then tossed it up in the air, his proximity to the boundary probably means that they'd have, that they wouldn't have allowed him to do that. Whereas if he was in the ring, there'd have been it's a completely different set of circumstances.
Absolutely.
Which, again, I want to see them now review a slip catch where someone's diving and flings it away, because you can say, well, you might have landed on your hand then, so you didn't have control.
Exactly.
And that's going to create, I think, a dangerous precedent now for us literally checking
everything.
50% of catches,
and that's where it's going to get really, really controversial. Is if a player in the roll or in the dive or whatever flicks the ball up in the air before he stopped moving, that will create another series of controversy. Look, Australia had no right to be upset at that decision. It was the right decision.
Okay, let's talk about whether England had a right to be upset at another decision in the game. So. England still very much second favourites at this point, but Johnny Bairstow had come out to join his skipper at the crease, had kind of, I guess withstood a little bit of that short ball barrage, and then he's stumped by Alex Carey. I'll get your thoughts first on this.
Well, this has been the draining part of today, hasn't it? Really recapping, and I'm sure you've been the same. Many conversations about was out, who was to blame, what's going on. Putting the whataboutism aside, because that's a phrase that has crossed my bows today for the first time. So the whataboutism aside, the laws of the cricket say that it's out, and I don't think that there's any controversy in that Alex Carey, in his mind, the ball was live at all times. So he caught the ball, immediately threw the ball at the stumps. He didn't delay. He didn't pretend to, throw it to first slip or anything like that. He caught the ball and immediately threw it at the stumps. So the ball is no doubt, in the umpire's mind, live at all times. The laws of cricket say that is out, and it's out stumped. And they are the pure laws, facts about the dismissal. And then we get into all the emotive stuff? Is it the right thing to do? Is it within the spirit of cricket? And this is where all of the controversy starts to happen, because if this was a club game on a Saturday, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that is, as provided you could get the player umpire to give it out, it's given out every day of the week. If this is a first-class game, it's given out. If it's a test match, not involving any two other countries, but most other countries, if this is a test match or a one-day game or any other type of game other than a final or an Ashes series, this isn't nearly the controversy that it is. But because it's these two sides and they have history in this match and they have history in this series and they have history going back 150 years, all of a sudden this has all come together to conflagrate into what is being described in the media as one of the biggest controversies in the history of Ashes cricket. To me, it's a storm in a teacup, in that to me it was clearly out. We'll get into maybe the backstory of it, but for me it's clearly out. It shouldn't be controversial. It's within the laws. It has been for a long time. It's not a new rule. It hasn't changed. The parties involved and the media has jumped on top of it and created this massive firestorm of controversy that, when you look at it, is a regulation dismissal.
Yeah. Look, I was going to risk an element of my argument by asking you a question, so I might ask my question of you at the end of this. Firstly, it's out. Just like the Starc catch wasn't out.
Yep.
This is absolutely out. However, I want to put some context to it from my perspective. So some people who listen and watch the pod may know I'm a keeper. This is something I have done many, many times when standing back. If I've thought that someone is batting a little bit out of their crease, or there's a chance of a stumping or a run out, I've been looking for it, and I've certainly had a go at the 10-pin bowling. Normally when someone's batting out of their crease or when they continually overbalance after they've played a shot, that's when I'm looking at it. I think the bit of context I just want to look at is that they've noticed that he goes for a walk and he goes to garden. So the thought process here is we can catch him doing that. We know he's not trying to attempt to run. We think he's being a little bit dozy.
Yep.
And we're going to try and catch him napping. So the closest thing that I can actually equate this to in terms of other dismissals that are in the game of cricket is this is the equivalent of a mankad, because this isn't a stumping opportunity in my view.
Yep.
They have seen him literally evade a bouncer where he's not lost his balance, but his balance has taken him out of his crease. Mm-hmm. He has then come and deliberately remarked his centre guard with his spike, tapped his bat in and then gone for a little walk. And that's happened so quickly, and Carey cannot be blamed for throwing the ball back in one motion because he's absolutely done it. But this has happened in a split second. So for me, this is like a little bit of it's as close to a mankad as you can possibly get. I only wish it have happened last week in the first session of the game, because I think that this would have poked a bear in Johnny Bairstow that you don't want to poke, and poked a bear in Stuart Broad, who up until this was, arm round Davey Warner's shoulder during the course of the game. He's now got that little bit of...
He's got that
little bit of niggle back in him. I think he saw Ben Stokes drill one back at, I think it was Pat Cummins who dropped a caught and bowl chance, and Broad was heard on the stump mic. He said, I suppose you caught that as well, didn't you? And then he's had a little go, and, he said to Alex Carey, this is all you'll be remembered for, champ. I actually like that because it's got that niggle back, and we'll talk about that. But for me, it is a little bit around the context of it.
And it is. And what's...
My question...
Yeah, okay, go for it.
...is, if I've done that on a Saturday in your Hibiscus Coast 2-day side, I reckon you'd be calling the guy back. The pause says it all there, Baldy.
I would think about it. I don't think I would. I don't think I would call him back. I certainly wouldn't call him back if the opposition keeper had a go in the first innings. So to complete the context, and to be fair, Johnny Bairstow had a go at Labuschagne on day 3, the same kind of situation. Maybe not in the same context in that, Marnus was maybe Marnus was being dozy. Who knows?
No, so that's where I think it was different. I think that was in the course of having a quick shot at the stumps when a guy was out of his crease. He hadn't come back into mark his guard. Bairstow had done that 3 or 4 balls in a row where he'd regained his ground and then wandered. So I think there's a little bit of, mate, you're being a bit dozy here. Don't do it again.
Don't do it again.
And that's why I equate it to the mancad. The other thing I'd be really interested to hear from our listeners and viewers and perhaps particularly umpires is, are they calling over? Or is there a sort of a actions speak louder than words as well? Because when you actually look at the replay again, you see Chris Gaffney at square leg sort of walking in as if the ball's dead. You see the umpire at the striker's end actually unclipping the cap of the bowler. So he's not even looking down at the striker's end.
And here's the real challenge, isn't it? I mean, all of this, you're right, in that the mancad equivalent is what's causing the controversy, right? And there are without getting into the how about isms, there are lots of examples of players being run out, being dozy or tapping back and then going to celebrate a milestone or thinking that the ball is dead or whatever. There are lots of examples of that in the history of cricket. There are examples of a player playing a shot and then just after the ball's in the keeper's gloves, just overbalancing a little bit and then, being given out. There's lots of different variations on a theme. The reason that it's so emotive is that, 1, it's the Ashes, and then 2, it is like that mancad situation. So whatever side of the fence you lie on, there's this narrative that you can build up in your mind. Oh, but England have run out Colin de Grandhomme last year, and Ben Foakes took a wicket against Ireland. I think it was Andy Balbirnie, stumped them out, holding the ball in his glove, waiting, and then bang, Australia have been underarm and the sandpaper gate thing and Australians are you fall on this one side or the other of this emotive divide, and it's so easy to get caught up in that. And Stuart Broad was caught up in it, right? Stuart Broad came out and said to Alex Carey, that's the only thing you'll be ever remembered for is effectively cheating. Whereas he forgets potentially that 10 years ago in an Ashes test match, he nicked one to first slip and stood there. So you get caught up in this emotion of the game and it gets the better of you sometimes. And the challenge for Australia is that England have far more to gain from getting that emotion, that emotional state up. You poke Johnny Bairstow, you poke Ben Stokes, you poke Stuart Broad. It can only benefit England going forward, and that's a real challenge for Australia, I think, if nothing else.
Awesome. Let's move on, because I think we could talk a lot of those what ifs throughout the course of cricketing history. It was straight on Twitter that McCullum had done it in a game, I think, against Pakistan. So he's been called a hypocrite today. But anyway, let's
Can we just before we move on, because he has done it 3 times in his career, and he said, I think after the 3rd time when Dan Vettori called Paul Collingwood back. Actually, it was Paul Collingwood moved out of the way of a bouncer, and I think he overbalanced, and McCullum ran him out in very similar fashion to the Bairstow dismissal. And Dan Vettori, ironically, who's also involved in the series as a coach now, called Collingwood back on that day. And I think on reflection, McCullum said, I think post-game or post-series, that he has not learned a lesson from that, but he probably wouldn't have...
The spirit of cricket evolves during your career.
Yeah, so anyway, lots of controversy, it's out.
Okay, right. Let's get on to a question. And look, I think this will lead into the Headingley look forward as well. There's a lot been said around England's approach to this summer, and we'll definitely come on to that. It's a point I want to make as we lead into the Headingley Test match. But was this game entertaining?
It was certainly controversial. I don't think particularly the bowling tactics of either team were particularly entertaining. I thought Australia's bowling tactics, excuse the language, you might have to prep the bleeping, they were boring as batshit. Honestly, I don't like watching any bowler run in and bowl bouncer after bouncer after bouncer with 6 guys back on the left side.
Don't say that near Raj Reddy or Neil Wagner.
No, but it's just not. It's not as entertaining as the alternative for me as a cricket fan, and that's my view. That's my emotional state and my investment in the game. Is I find that to be far less entertaining. If I wanted to watch that, I'd watch baseball, because that's effectively what baseball is to a certain extent, right? You've got a whole bunch of guys in the outfield waiting to take a catch, and you're just hoping for a batter to make that mistake. Where it gets really boring is if the batters have to sway out of the way for 6-10 overs, and you take away all opportunity to score rather than taking that shot into account. I find it to be very, very boring to watch. I wasn't entertained by either side doing it.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think throughout the course of this game, it's certainly kept you emotionally invested. But from a cricketing perspective, I can barely, with the exception of the last day, and probably only the last day from when Bairstow came out to bat, that was the most exciting passage of play in the game. I cannot remember a single passage of play other than that throughout the course of the game. It was dull. I think the wicket was horribly two-paced.
And that allowed that tactic to be fruitful, right?
And I think the cricket ball as well has really, really gone to sleep over the course of the game, which hasn't helped either.
And the real sad thing is that England in particular, and let's face it, England have done the vast majority of the work in this space to make Test cricket entertaining, to make it fun to watch, to bat at 5 and over and challenge sides and do all the things that they do, even to the point where I think the best part of it is that they put four or five slips in and go, right, okay, we're going to pitch the ball up. You make a mistake, we nick you off. You might drive some through the covers and down the ground. We're prepared to let you try that. We're prepared
you'll nick one eventually.
Because you'll nick one, right? England went away from that tactic and it was very effective for them, and they might learn a lesson from that and maybe dial back the Bazball dial from 11 back to 8 and maybe try that tactic a little bit more going forward in the series. But if that is the analytics answer to cricket, then it is going to be detrimental to the entertainment product of Test cricket going forward. So however we solve the problem is now here, in the same way that there have been problems in Test cricket for the last 5 years in terms of all sorts of other things. This tactic of bowling short with the fielders out on the leg side, such as it is a problem that cricket needs to start looking at, because that is not the future of Test cricket that we want to be watching, particularly if we get a limited diet of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the Headingley Test match. So this one does come around rapidly. So we're recording this on Monday night New Zealand time, Wednesday night New Zealand time. I think the game starts in earnest. As we lead into that, changes for England. Ollie Pope stays in the squad despite the shoulder injury that he sustained during the course of this Test match. So they've not called anyone up. They are getting a scan on his shoulder, so we might see a change if that has any repercussions. But Dan Lawrence, the spare batter, in the squad, so no call up for the likes of Ben Foakes or any of the wild and bold predictions like a David Milan coming into the side from the start of the series. Matt Potts has been released to go back and play county cricket for Durham, so unlikely that he obviously comes into the reckoning. So Chris Wokes and Mark Wood, the spare seamers, and then Moeen Ali, of course, still in the squad, and hopeful that he will play a part. Australia we've talked about, so we've got an injury to Nathan Lyon, obviously. But let's look forward to Headingley. My take on this, and I've written it down on the run sheet board, is at the moment you're just the better cricket side, and England, I think, have done okay to hang in and be in both of these games to an extent. Do you see this as, is that how you see things leading into Headingley Test? And any changes that you think you'd see for the Australian team?
Let's deal with the first one first. I think the teams are probably a little bit closer coming off a 2-0 series scoreline than I think you would probably want to admit.
Yeah,
I think you sometimes you take a little bit of a pessimistic view of your team, as I do of my team, very much so. I think England have played some really, really good cricket in this series, but they've gifted Australia opportunities, and Australia have been a little bit sort of steady as she goes and have taken those opportunities slightly better than England, although Australia have done a couple of things to give England, grabs at games and so forth. Australia are playing slightly more complete cricket end-to-end at the moment, but England aren't far away. And if they get their attitude, their mentality right, and they have a bit of a, dare I say it, an FU attitude going into this next test, I think they're going to be a different beast and a different level of competitiveness. The question for me is, what do England do with their bowling attack? Do they bring Mo Ali back into the side and drop one of those fast bowlers out and have 3 and 1? Or do they go with 4 fast bowlers again, have Joe Root or Dan Lawrence come into the side to provide some other options, and then they talk about rotating a like-for-like pace replacement. Does, 30 wicket series bowler Mark Wood come in and get 3 back-to-back 10-fers and fulfil my bold prediction? Or do they go with a Chris Wokes and go for a little bit more batting at number 8? So lots of questions for England to answer. For Australia, it's who's going to replace Nathan Lyon. Todd Murphy is a natural like-for-like replacement as an off-spinner who has performed well in his limited test series so far. But Australia have seen a formula for England that, although they've lost the test match, has potentially been quite successful for them in that they've got 4 pace bowlers. They've got a bit of batting that they can inject into that with, Robinson and to a lesser extent Broad. Australia need not 3 number 11s, but they need a bit of Starc and a bit of Cummins in there to shore up the batting a little bit. So I wonder if they'll just go, well, you know what, Scott Boland played reasonably well in his career so far. Could he just come in for Nathan Lyon and we play 4 fast bowlers and we play a little bit of Smith and a little bit of Head and a little bit of Marnus Labuschagne and we have our spin bowling by committee in Headingley? I don't think that's the best way to go, but I think that's one of the considerations for Australia.
And you think that's the way they will go, or do you think it's just a like-for-like swap, Murphy in for Lyon?
I think Australia will pick Todd Murphy in that they like having a spinner in the team. I think he provides a point of difference, as Mitchell Starc provides a point of difference. If our only spin option is Travis Head, England can go after Travis Head really, really hard. And if they belt Travis Head out of the attack, what are Australia going to do? Particularly if the wicket does take turn. I think Todd Murphy is young enough in his career. Mentally, he's got a huge hill to climb, but he has all the physical skills and he has all of the craft that we've seen so far. I've been really impressed by his craft as an offie. He has all the skills to be able to combat that. It's whether or not mentally he's going to be able to resist that massive pressure that a fired up Ben Stokes, a fired up Johnny Bairstow and co are going to be able to put on him. For England, Adam, do you think they should make a change with the bowling attack? And is Dan Lawrence locked in to come in if Ollie Pope is not able to play? Yeah,
look, I think he would have to come in if Ollie Pope is ruled out of the test match. Despite the fact you've got Bairstow batting down at 7, I don't think you can have Bairstow batting at 6 and then even someone like a Chris Wokes coming in at 7, and that would be the route they would have to go if they did if they did not play that additional batter. So look, I think they're definitely going to play the 5 specialist batters, Ben Stokes and Johnny Bairstow. I think whether that's Lawrence or whether that's Pope. The question mark for me is whether they do look to get Moeen Ali back into the side if he's fit. Or I think ultimately it's going to come down to the fact that Josh Tongue was probably our most impressive bowler in this game. There's a argument potentially that Ollie Robinson hasn't quite been at the races, but I think Headingley, particularly if the overheads are there, is a ground that would suit him. So I think they've got to look into those bowlers' eyes and go, are you guys all up for a game in 3 days' time where you've put a lot of overs into your legs, and particularly bowling 40 or 50 overs worth of bumpers at Australia will have certainly taken it out of that attack. And I think Stuart Broad will be desperate to play. I thought he bowled pretty well in this test match. Jimmy Anderson, I think you saw when he was batting, he was getting quite wound up by the fact that he wasn't sort of reprieved any of the short stuff. I think he's pretty pissed off and he'd want to get back out there. So I think Stokes will be looking at those guys in the eye and going, who's really up for this? Who's got that level of fire? And I think Mark Wood definitely comes into the reckoning. So that for me would be the only change I would make. And I don't know who I'd make that change for. It would be one of Broad, Anderson or Robinson that misses out, and Wood coming in for a fresh pair of legs, depending on who's fit and who's raring to go come Wednesday night at Headingley.
What do you think the selectors will do? I'll throw the same question to you that you threw to me. You would pick Wood over maybe a Robinson or Broad or Anderson. What do you think the selectors will do?
I think that they will go down that route as well. I really do. I think we'll play the seamers. I think we'll play Joe Root on his home ground with a bit of off spin if we need it, because I think they've seen that this the short ball tactic has worked to an extent. If they've got some quicker cattle on the field to do that in Mark Wood, I think that would be helpful. if it is a pitch that's, again, a flat pitch like we've seen, the extra speed of Mark Wood through the air. So I think if they can possibly find a way of doing it, they'll get Wood in. I think it'll be at the expense of Ollie Robinson if Broad and Anderson both say, yeah, we're good to go, because I think the right overhead conditions, they're the guys to exploit them at Headingley, and then the express pace of Tong and Wood, for me, is a route that England would want to go down if they've got those two guys fit over the course of the next year or two.
2 test matches down, 3 to go. Australia need one more win to win the Ashes in England for the first time since 2001. They need a draw to retain the Ashes, and as a minimum draw the series. What do England need to do in the next 3 test matches to win 3 on the bounce and win back the Ashes?
So first thing is, I don't think they've got to think about winning 3 test matches. I think they've got to think about winning this first test match at Headingley. And, they've said it. We won a series 3-0 against New Zealand last year. We beat Pakistan 3-0. We know we can do that. We know we can go on that kind of run. I think what's been really interesting for me is a change in the rhetoric from England. I heard Brendan McCullum in the first, couple of lines of his post-match press conference said, we've seen 2 close contests. It's what everybody's wanted to see. I'll just say, Brendan, I love you. I think you've done a great job with my national side, but it's certainly not what I want to see. I want to see England winning. This is sport, and that is important to, I think you could tell from the Lord's crowd, it was bloody important to them. I think it was really interesting then that we've seen Ben Stokes, who at the start of the series says we're not getting too carried away. We're not worried that this is an Ashes series. If we start thinking about this is an Ashes series, it changes our mentality. And then he has said, quote, in these post-game press conferences, this is Ashes cricket. So I think the Carey dismissal of Bairstow has poked the bear. It has really riled up the England guys and has shown, I think, that the guys that were in the ground at Lords in the social media explosion afterwards, people, yes, are, absolutely bought into a positive brand of cricket that at times will be bloody entertaining. But I think they have actually flipped a switch now that it's about winning games of cricket that's going to, enthrall this British public, which, let's be honest, didn't really need to be dragged kicking and screaming to watch England play Test cricket. We filled our Test grounds for the last 20 years. So I think they've subtly changed the rhetoric to be now more focused on trying to win this game at Headingley. And that for me is going to be, I think an exciting prospect, because it's the first time we've heard it in the last little while, versus this is just another game crap.
Anything other than rhetoric? I mean, England coming out and punching Australia in the mouth figuratively. Let's not condone anyone actually punching anyone on the cricket field. But England really need to send a message early in this next Test match, don't they? They need to send a message mentally and with their body language that they're up for this game and they're prepared to get in Australia's face a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think they will. I think more important, to be perfectly honest, is sending a message when they bat. And if they get themselves in a position with the way that they've batted positively throughout the course of this series, which they've done in every innings at some point, they have created the kind of carnage that, Bazball has wanted to create. The next step for me is not the rhetoric, not the body language, not the posture. It's actually when they get themselves in that position of having created a little bit of chaos, that they then go, right, now we're really going to make it count. And we're not going to let Australia have a sniff. Yes, we'll put time back into the game. We'll put ourselves in a position to win the game if we need to by a bold declaration or, some funky plans. But first and foremost, if they've got the opportunity to put the foot on the throat, figuratively, they'd do it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think if England were to change anything, it's to minimise the double faults in their service game. They've just had too many double faults in the first 2 Test matches, and if they get fired up, Nick Kyrgios style or whoever, like whatever analogy you want to put in it,
Tim Henman,
anyone, absolutely, Tim Henman, Wimbledon crowd get behind Tim Henman. If they get behind England, and we know that Headingley can, and Headingley can be a raucous crowd.
Will be raucous.
They will be giving it to the Australians. So the England need to feed off of that emotion and that body language, but they just need to temper it by saying, actually, when we get ourselves into a good position, we really need to capitalise on that rather than try and go for the $1 million pass. just keep making good shots, keep hitting make the shot that makes the next shot easy, and make Australia do a lot more work than they have had to do to win the first 2 test matches. And
in closing, Baldy, what about Australia? What do they need to do? They certainly didn't take a backward step on the field today. Pat Cummins was pretty pissed off, I think, in those pressers afterwards. He went very insular, went from being the nice guy. It looks as if he's a little bit rattled in those press conferences, which after you've been booed for 3 hours probably gets to anybody.
Yep.
What do Australia need to do leading into Headingley?
They need to mentally prepare themselves to be booed, to be the villains. They don't want to... I draw the line, I make the distinction between being prepared to be dealing with being branded as a villain and making yourself out to be a villain. I think Australia need to be prepared that, like it or not, the English press and the crowd will be branding Australia as cheats, as villains. They'll be booing Australia, will be jeering. They will be making life as difficult as they can for the Australian team. The guys they need to be talking to in that dressing room, particularly a guy like Todd Murphy, is how do you get yourself up mentally for that game? And whether it's talking to a guy like Usman Khawaja, who seems to behave and act and go about his business exactly the same way, like a duck across the pond, no matter what's happening, or whether it's a guy like David Warner that needs to be in the scrap to get himself mentally up to the level that he wants to be at, they're going to need to find their own level individually to be able to handle what the English crowd, what the media is going to throw at them over that 5 days at Headingley. Australia, if they put in 5 good days of Test cricket and they take their opportunities and hold their catches and hold their nerve, could be at 3-0 up at the end of this series and at the end of this test, and surprise everyone. But they're going to have to climb a massive, massive emotional and mental hill to get there, because England are coming at them like a freight train, and they'll have 35,000 supporters in the stadium, or whatever the capacity of Headingley is, plus all the press box, plus everybody in the catering staff and the security guards, and like everybody will be gunning for them now. So they have to be prepared to almost build that fortress mentality to be able to get out of Headingley with a win. It's going to be exciting to see. I can't believe we're talking about it going up to another level, but after 2 test matches, the level of excitement is going to another level come Thursday.
Awesome. Well, look, let's hope it's a more entertaining game of cricket in terms of a decent wicket, perhaps a ball that doesn't go soft, a bit more stroke play, a few more nicks, and for Stu, probably a few more through the gate from whichever spinner might line up in either of these 2 teams. No time for domestic New Zealand news on the Top Order podcast. My apologies to all of our New Zealand fans. Stu and Raj hopefully back next week, where we'll dissect the next instalment in this enthralling Ashes series. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us both here in Auckland. We'll see you on the Top Order podcast next week. Good night.